Hi, welcome to the video demonstration of Core Impact. Today we're going to walk through different attacks that you can perform with Core Impact, specifically focusing on network, client-side, and web application, which are all available to test for within the Core Impact offensive toolkit. I'm going to walk through each phase of what an RPT is and talk a little bit about what an RPT is, as well as different ways to look at the console and some of the modules that are on the back end of the product. We will also have additional videos on our website to take deeper dives into specific areas. So the first thing I wanted to point out is that when you log into Core Impact and you create a workspace, you're going to be presented with the console screen. And to give you an idea of what's going on this screen, first I want to focus on what type of attack am I doing now. As you can see, I'm on the network vector. So what this means is my target environment is going to be host or assets or IPs, however you want to define that. Now I'm moving over to client side. So now my target environment is going to be emails. Now I'm moving to web applications. So my target environment is going to be web application. As you can see, I can move very quickly between each of the vectors, and I can test these vectors individually in silos, but I can also test them and move between each of these vectors. For example, if I'm able to harvest credentials from a phishing campaign, I might use those credentials on the network side. Or if I'm able to land an agent on the web application side, whether it be a SQL injection agent or an OS command injection agent or a local remote file inclusion agent, I might be able to traverse over to the web server that's hosting that application, in which case would give me a foothold in the network. Again, all of these tests can be done individually based off of the scope of work or what you're actually trying to achieve, as well as can be done to see if you can move like an attacker across these different vectors. As I start performing certain modules that are all going to be listed, and I'll just show you where those are listed on the back end, those modules will be executed over to the far right. And you'll see a level of output for each of those modules down below. So as I start performing a test, get that out of there. Start performing a test of a specific module, I'll be able to see that communication from Core Impact to the target. That'll be the module log, very similar to if you were looking at it from a command line standpoint. The module parameters are very similar to if you were to put in what parameters that you wanted to. For example, if I create a new host, the parameters will be the IP address, the operating system, and the architecture. Now, when I right-clicked inside of there, it brought up a module. That module I can also find over here, new host. So as you can see, modules are individual ways of creating either new entities that you're going to attack or running scans or exploits or performing tasks against those hosts. And these modules are all located in these folders. If I go to client side, there's a module for new email. So if I type in new email, there's a module, and I can also right click and create a new module or use that same module here. So there's very many areas within the tool that you can right click and create new things. For instance, if I go to email and right click, I can create a new email that way. As I start performing these, you'll see these modules over to the right. You'll see the different levels of output. The output is a high level summary of what took place for that module. So let's start with new email. I'm going to keep it as John Doe, but I could put any type of email that I want to in here. So if I wanted to put the president of a certain company or the CFO of a certain company and spoof that, I could do that. But I'm just going to keep it as the generic John Doe for now. So these are the parameters for this email. When I hit OK, you're going to see that module being executed. You're going to see the output, meaning what was the result of that module, which you can see created John Doe. You see the log data. So this is the command line. And then you can see the parameters that I used, right? Now this module will actually be saved up in the, or this executed module will be saved, and this is for reporting purposes. We have several different reports we'll get to at the end, but as you can see, this right here is right clickable, but it's not deletable. So I can do other things around this, but I can't delete it. However, I can delete it over here. Now below, real quick before I delete this, you can see the quick information. Now this is quick information around this email. However, if I'm on the network side, it could be quick information around the host. So ports that are listening, filtered, closed. If it's a web application, some of the information I've gathered from that web application. So a really quick way for me to start identifying vulnerabilities that might exist, or the attack vector of that host, or the attack vector or information around that web page that I might be able to use further in attack. This quick information is also very helpful if I'm looking at a specific exploit and I want to see what that exploit does, or how it works, or what information about it. I can click on this and it'll populate that down in the quick information below. So I can use this information to educate myself, so to speak, on exactly what the specific exploit is, as well as the CVE number that's tied to it. So as you notice, there's a lot of modules within the product, and I would be able to use these modules individually. So if I want to do a discovery on the network, I might use these different methods of discovery. If I want to port scan, I might use these different modules to port scan. If I want to do OS detection, I might use these different modules to do OS detection. If I wanted to import from a third-party scanner, which most cases companies might be looking from a vulnerability validation standpoint and already doing scanning with their scanning tool, so they want to say, hey, I want to grab my output from that tool and load it up. In which case you can click this module, go and grab your file wherever it's located, and then pull that file in and have Core apply that imported data. Now, the reason I talk about all these individual modules is because when we think of a rapid penetration test, or what we call an RPT, this is really a framework of how to go through a penetration test. But this framework pulls from individual modules. So to give you an example, when I talked about information gathering, there's a folder for that. And there's different ways of doing information gathering against your target environment. When I go to the RPT step, information gathering, it creates a wizard screen. And this wizard screen gives me the ability to pull information from those modules that I showed you. For example, if I go to import data from a third-party scanner, well, there was a folder for import data. And if I click here, I can actually look through all of that imported data modules that we have. So if I have a Nessus file and I want to import that data, I can go and find that Nessus file that's local, and I can plug it in. And I can hit next, next, finish, and it'll actually pull that information in. So you can see here the parameters from that. Here's the log information. It's applying this, so you can see it's going through each step, and then there's my host. Then I would be able to move into attack and penetration against this. Now I'm going to delete this for now and show you the other way that you can do information gathering Core, which is going to use Nmap on the back end to be able to identify those hosts. So remember, I showed you information gathering was discovery and port scans and OS detection. Well, I can come through here and say, what range am I going to be on? So I'm on the correct range. Fast detail, these are more like templates that we've already have pre-designed. I can go to custom. I could pull all of these different things custom based off of what I want to do within the environment. So different types of scans and different types of discovery methods. All of those, I can make those selections. However, I don't need to. I can actually just click detailed and be able to utilize detailed here. And then there's additional options that I could also select from here as well. Within these options, I can make the selection, hit next, and then I could decide, do I want to look for services, banner grabs, zone transfers, pings, all of that. In this case, I'm going to say I'm internal to the network, and I'm going to keep all of those selected. Hit finish, and now you're going to see Core go through each individual step within this field. So it's doing network information gathering, and then underneath that, it's going to go through each of those individual steps that I asked it to go through. So it's going to identify a host on the network, and then it's going to start scanning those hosts. As you can see, it's kicking off several different modules all at once, and then it's applying those over to the left. So now I know that I'm doing network information gathering against my target environment. If I go to client side, we have different ways of doing client side as well. Information gathering, I can come in here and look through different ways that I could identify emails. So in this case, I'm going to be looking for emails that I want to populate inside my target environment. And like I mentioned before, if I come over here to information gathering and client side, I have different ways of doing that here. So again, RPT is just a representation of what's already in the folder systems. So whichever way you want to identify those, from the folders or from the RPT step. I'm going to use the RPT step because it is something that we feel is very useful for people to get, go through a test very quickly, do things at a global level, as well as much easier for people to kind of wrap their heads around. Now in this case, if I wanted to use LinkedIn, so let's say I wanted to scan LinkedIn for certain emails, I could put in coresecurity.com, I could put in Core Security here, and then I could put in the format of the email for Core Security. So maybe it's james.adams@Core Security, and then it'll look for any kind of email format on LinkedIn that people might exist. And it'll populate that over to the left. And this works the same way for either crawling a website, using Google or Bing, Whois records, but in this case, I'm just going to import it from a file. And I'm going to go to LabDocs, and we can do it from a CSV or a text file. I happen to have mine on a text file. Hit finish, and then it's going to populate those emails. As I can check back over on my network side, it looks like I've got several machines that have been identified. It's still going through the process. As you can see, it's identified several Linux machines. It's looking to identify these other machines, which look like Windows machines from here. Client side, I've got my attacker and I've got my victim, which I've got listed as root. And now I'm going to move to web application. So web application, again, think of the folder system. I have a folder for information gathering. I have a folder for discovering pages. So we're going to actually crawl that, but we can also import from a third-party scanner as well. So any of these will be able to take the output and load those in. For Burp Suite, for example, I'll have to create a scenario, which I'll talk about in a second. But once that scenario is created, I can just go out and grab my Burp Suite output, load that in, and it'll automatically apply that, and my target environment will be filled out. You can also information gather using Core. So I'm going to open up the wizard. I'm going to create a scenario first. We'll call this web test. Hit next. Do I want to crawl a known application, or maybe on the host side, over here on the network side, I discover that there's something running 443 or port 80, and I want to scan that. Depends on which way you want to do it. In this case, I'm going to go with a known application. And I can come in, I can just put in the URL and tell it to crawl down. So that's what we call an automatic crawl. For example, I've got my web application here, so I could hit copy, go back over to Core, paste it in, and then just say crawl down. I can make additional selections, so if I have to go through a proxy, if I need to configure any header information, do I want to impersonate a different user agent or web browser? This is the number of pages you'll be crawling, so if you say, I don't want to crawl 300 pages, I want to crawl like 15 or 20. If I want to add in additional domains, if I want to capture the framework, so all of these are additional options. If I need to log in at some point, so session management, I can say yes, it's forms based, and then put in the username and password, or I could use identities. Maybe I create an identity that I know I'm going to have to play over and over, so I just come over here in my identities folder and say, yep, I'm going to log in with that, and then it'll fill that in every time. Once I kick this off, take that out, it'll apply that. Now I'm going to stop this because I have another method that I like to use for crawling, which is known as, we call it interactive, or think of it as like a manual way of crawling. But it did go ahead and create that scenario, so I did stop it right on time. So now I've already got this scenario created. I could just drag information gathering over to this, hit next, and I'm going to do interactive crawling. Some of the same fields will apply. Do I need a certificate, specific domains? Hit finish. The scenario is already created, so it's going to skip that step for me. And it's going to tell me to change my proxy settings. So I'm going to set those up to capture. Hit save. And now I'm going to be in capture mode. Go back to my application and interact. All right, that seems like good enough for me. Turn that off. Go back to core, and you can see I've captured pages. So excellent. So at this point in time, I've got client side, network, web application. Now it looks like there's a couple of hosts on the network that didn't identify, so I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to go to information gathering, go to OS detection, and I can pick any of these methods to gather more information and fingerprint this operating system. So I'm just going to use banner grab and hit OK. And this one I'm going to try SMB. And it's going to reach out and try to identify very quickly. So you can see the XP was very quick. Still looking at it from a banner grab scenario. So maybe I use another one if this one doesn't work. Just different ways to do the same tasks. Close this out. So now we'll move into step 2 of RPT, which is going to be attack and penetration. Now what attack and penetration is going to do, it's going to apply different exploits towards my target environment, and I can do that in each phase. So if I'm doing attack and penetration on the client side, I could either do attack and penetration where I'm sending exploits over via phishing, or maybe I want to do it with a USB, or I'm going to do attack and penetration against these different hosts. So I can go through and say, you know, do I want to use the OWASP top 10, which is what Core uses. To give you an example, if I go to exploits, here's the different attacks for the web application side. If I go to network and go to exploits, here are the different remote exploits that I have. Now Core actually does have the ability to integrate with Metasploit framework, so you can download the supported version of Metasploit from our site and then do a quick install on your own system and then do a quick integration. This is not required or necessary to run Core Impact, but it is available for you if you want to utilize additional exploits. Now, we quality test all of our exploits that we write internally, so if you bring anything inside, or bring anything from the outside, I should say, we won't be able to quality test those. So there will be run at your own risk. And some of those will give you remote code execution, some of them won't. So always take a look and see inside of those exploits information about those. So you can click inside of here, and there's all my different exploits I have for that. I can look at those. You can see that it's unsupported because it's outside of any quality testing that we've performed with Core. All right, so we have our target environment set up here, client side, web application. So let's go ahead and kick off a network attack against these hosts. I'm going to drag this information over, and what this will do is all of the applicable exploits for each of these targets will be applied by you doing this or utilizing this. So if I want to exploit this Metasploitable machine, and there's several different vulnerabilities that exist on it, then it's going to try all of the exploits that would be applicable to this machine based off the services and operating system. So if I wanted to do individually, I could do like this, or I could just pull it over all of them, in which case I can make my selections again through the wizard screen. So do I want to launch modules against this that are going to have exploits or vulnerabilities, so code vulnerabilities, or do I want to do brute force and dictionary attacks? So we can also do brute force dictionary attacks with credentials, either credentials that you've harvested before, credentials that you've provided from the outside, or credentials that we give you, which we have a list of usernames and passwords. And each of these screens gives me additional ways of making selections. This screen gives me different options on how to select my parameters. So the parameters that I showed you on individual modules, I'm actually making those selections from here. What type of exploit criteria do I want to use? If there's any exploits that I want to run in a specific order, so maybe the most recent ones that are put into the tool, or maybe ones that are run pretty quickly, or maybe ones that give me privilege level first, and then ones that don't give me privilege levels after those, depending on how I want to execute that order. The options I feel are most important would be agent communication, so I'm going to go and make a selection here. Now everything in Core is scripted in Python, and you can go and see the Python code on any of the modules. I'll show you that in a minute. But when it says connection method default, it's going to be saying whatever method is originally put into that source code for the exploit, it's going to utilize that. But you can force it to do other ones. So if I want to force it to do a connect to, which is like a bind shell, or connect from, which is like a reverse shell, if I want to reuse the same port communicating back and forth, or if I want to use HTTP or HTTPS, and then I can determine what type of port I wanted to call back on. In this case, I'm just going to go with a reverse shell for most of these and hit finish. As you can see, it's going to run through network attack and penetration, and it's going to start applying those. Oh, try that again. Oh, let's see. Maybe my services didn't come back. Yep. So let's do a quick service lookup on everything. We'll go to service detection, and I'll pre-fill all of my machines. Hit OK. And it's kicking those off. So it's going to run through and identify that information down below. And it takes a little bit of time to run through each of those. So I'm going to go back over to client side and web application and run some of those tests. In this case, I could do the same thing with the rapid penetration test here, where I could grab this and apply that to individual host, right? Or I could apply it to the whole web test. So if I just want to pull it over and try each of those attacks, so injection, broken authentication, sensitive data exposure, external entities, cross-site scripting, misconfigurations, and I could just hit next, next, next. Typically, I try to focus on what the vulnerability is on that page or what I'm trying to test for. So if I just said, you know what, I'm going to unselect everything or deselect everything and just run with SQL injection or command injection, it'll try that on all of these different pages. But you can be a little bit more selective. So for instance, I went through each of these when I was information gathering, and I tried different exploits or positioned different exploits. So for this bottom one, I know I want to look at cross-site scripting. So I'm going to go to cross-site scripting. I'm going to grab the analyzer, bring it over to the page, make my selections, which again, these can all be switched and changed the way you'd like, but basically it's a true or false. Hit OK. And now it's going to run SQL injection. And this one, I put in username and password information. So I was going to try, or excuse me, that's cross-site scripting. I'm going to try SQL injection over here. So I'm going to grab that. And this is the different fuzzing techniques that you would put inside the field. So we will look for unions, we will look for blinds, but how much fuzzing do you want to input into that field? So think of like single quotation or double dash or 1 equals 1. So I'm going to go with a normal amount, which is about midway through. Hit OK. It's going to try that. And then one of these I also was looking at. So again, down at quick information, I can go through and see what I've gathered for this. So I think this one's the one where I actually put into Facebook. Yep. So I'm going to go with OS command injection and drag that over. Now, Core is going to run through all of these steps automatically for me. So it's a very automated penetration testing tool on each side. So that means I don't really have to do anything other than kick these off and kind of monitor the behavior. The real part of Core is once you are landing an agent or a payload, how do you interact with that? So that's what we're looking for when we're using Core. And as you can see here, I'm able to get a SQL agent. So this is more of a logical agent. So it's not writing anything to the page, but it's giving me a way to communicate with that database through this SQL agent. Excuse me. And I can look for additional information or additional post exploitation steps through this. So I can go to information gathering local, and I can see if I highlight on this agent what's available. So maybe I want to look for sensitive information. Maybe I want to look for schema. Maybe I want to look for version. Maybe I want to look for logins. All of this I can do against this. So let's go with schema. Hit OK. So you can see now that I'm getting the schema of the database, right? And because I can get the schema, if I go and right click, I can see if I can get command shell access to this machine, meaning the web server that's hosting this page, or I can get SQL shell access. So let's go with SQL shell since I do know some of the database information. I can come back over here and look through and say, you know, what's the name of a table? Maybe I want a credit card information. Maybe I want account information, right? So let's see, that's good. Username and password, so we'll go with do a quick query, password, text from accounts. Oop. Try it again. Oh, no underscore. Boom. Do the same thing, and there's one called usernames. There you go. So you can see very quickly, I've got username and passwords, and it's saved over here. So I can right click, select all, copy it, move it over somewhere, and then that'll be part of my report later. So I can have that information for me at a later time. I'm going to stop this. You can also see that I've got OS command injection agent. So this gives me command shell or command line access to the web server. So you can see now I'm on the box. So I can say, who am I? So it looks like I'm not running as root, but I do have access here. So if I say list, information where I'm at, maybe I change the home directory, list here, start kind of sniffing around, and I can run command line. So let's say I want to try to run a curl command or maybe pull in another exploit from outside. Maybe I have that hosted somewhere and want to pull that in. However, Core gives you the capabilities of doing that under our agents folder. So I can go to agents and see I've got all these different ways of installing an OS-based agent using a web-based agent. So if I had the right access on the SQL agent, I might be able to do that. But I can do that with a command injection agent as well. Now you see on this side, I don't have any agents at this time. I'm just going to check my services. There we go. So now it's pulled that information back. So I'm going to say, let's try to land an OS-based agent using a command injection agent. Hit OK. And it's going to do this automatically for me. Now, like I mentioned before, if I hit edit on any of the exploits in the tool, I'll actually have the ability of looking at the Python code so you can see this information and how it works. And one of the things that you can notice is that it's going through this process automatically for me. Now it says new agent deployed. So that means on this host, 192.168.221.129 host, I have an agent, so I can come over here to the network. Now I have a foothold inside of the network. So I can right click on this agent, do shell, do who am I, right? So now same thing, but I'm on the network, which gives me the capabilities of, let's imagine, for example, I didn't have any of these hosts identified. I was just attacking the web application. Now I've got a foothold on this web server. I can right click, set as source, which is our way of doing pivoting. So maybe I want to pivot from my local host to this new agent on the inside of maybe a DMZ or inside the network, and then scan that network from this new agent. Very quickly, I can set a source and start pivoting. And if I find another vulnerability on another part of the network, I can set a source and pivot to that machine as well. All right, so we've got this agent in place. Go one back over to here, cross-site scripting. So we have additional ways of doing cross-site scripting. If I go to exploits and go to cross-site scripting, I can actually generate a malicious link. So think of like reflective cross-site scripting. Hit OK. Now here's my link. Copy this and just paste it inside of a browser. So we'll just make a new one like this. All right, so this is the page. However, if I'm a user, I'm looking at this page. Maybe someone emails this page to me or this link to me. Put a hyperlink on it, so I click it. Now I'm redirected here. But over on the core side, now I have a browser agent. And this browser agent gives you the capabilities of doing things like keyloggers or defacing the browser. Really some post-exploitation stuff, even doing client-side attacks against this browser agent. So very cool things. I'm going to go ahead and hit stop. And again, we've got this video and some other exploits against web applications. You can check those out on our site. All right, so let's go back to the network side. Do RPT. Go to network here. I've got this payload in place. I'm going to right click and just uninstall it. And now I'm going to grab attack and penetration like I tried before. I think I have services available, and just go through and just hit next, next. Remember, I want to do a reverse shell. Come up here, change it to connect from, hit finish. And now that's a little bit better. So now it's going through each of these exploits against my target environment. And I can just sit back and see if I have anything. You can see that it creates a TCP listener. So I am doing a reverse shell. So each time it's using a reverse shell, it's going to use that listener. Right? While we're waiting for that, I'm going to go to client side. Again, we can have different ways of doing attacks. So if you go to your modules folder, go to exploits, and go to client side, you've got all these different exploits that you can use. So you can package these up and send via email. So you can send it this way. However, you can also do that from the wizard, attack and penetration. Most people will think of client-side as phishing. We actually do some very good things around the phishing campaign. So I'm going to go ahead and click phishing. It's going to start my wizard. Again, I can make this selection from the module itself. I can redirect someone to a page. So maybe I have a training page that I want users to, as soon as they click a link, they're logged into a new training portal, and it's a phishing, security awareness training, stuff like that. So I could put that page in here. What we can also do is clone a page. So I'm going to actually do this. This is kind of like a man-in-the-middle attack. So I'm going to clone LinkedIn.com. I'm going to clone their login page. So I want the user to be presented with LinkedIn's page to log in. And I'm actually going to redirect them. Let's redirect them somewhere else. Let's try Core Security. That's going to come for the attacker, which is myself, to a victim. Now, your victim does have to have a real email address, so they've got to have something that actually receives that. But your attacker could be anybody. You could create that on the fly. I used to create notjames@notcoresecurity.com sometimes in demos and send that. And just to kind of show people that you really don't have to have the attacker as part of any type of email server or setup. Once I hit OK, it's going to pre-fill those for me, and I could send this to several different people. It's not just one by one. The difference between Core and others is that we actually do harvest credentials or get credentials when they input those, and you can use those again in the network side. We do have predefined emails, as well as you can import from an email client or from a Outlook or Thunderbird. So if you see a good email that comes through and you want to repurpose that, you can definitely do that and load those up. Or you can write your own. You can take the templates that we give you the HTML, and you can edit that information however you see fit as well. You can change the subject line. You can make it a little bit, this is more of like user experience type of stuff. The biggest thing, and all these are additional options, how long the web server is going to be listening for inbound connections, where do I want that web server to be hosted from. It's going to be hosted from localhost, meaning Core Impact is going to spin up that from my local machine, but I could put it on another machine. So think of, I've got an agent that's sitting on another host that I put it on. Maybe that agent's in AWS, or maybe it's somewhere in a data center. And I want those emails to go back to that agent versus coming back to localhost, which is me at my house. But the biggest important option is mail sending options, which is how are we going to relay this information over to my targets. Now, in my lab setup, I'm doing it locally, so I created my own email server to relay that information. But in the real world, you can use an SMTP relay that'll take that information and send it over. And there's several different SMTP relays that are open, or maybe you can pay for one. I use one that is free on the internet, gives me 300 a day. I'm not sending a lot of phishing emails each day, but it does work, and because it's on the internet and it's trusted, it'll actually get through a lot of these email gateways. In this case, I'm just going to have it on my local host like I've got set up here in my lab, so you won't need to do this. Yours will be different. And if you're an enterprise, you're probably going to be doing this internally, so you might just be able to leave this blank, and it'll just send using the mail record that you already have. You can see that line here, right? Hit finish. I'm going to just check on my network side. Oh yeah, so you can see that I've got some agents in place over here. I've got one on my XP machine. I've got two on my XP machine. I'm going to back over to my client side, and I can, again, I can utilize this, and I can say, just show me the client side stuff that's happening, right? So now I can open this up. Great, I can see that my email has gone through, successfully sent. Go to my email over here. See if I get that email to come through on this guy. Let me close that and open it. That error message scared me. Go back over to Core on the network side. So really right now it's just my Thunderbirds giving me a hard time. As you can see, I've sent several emails here in the past. So when those come through. Now, one of the things I didn't do is I didn't change the URL. So when you hover over it, somebody can hover over it, they can see that. I can actually change that within Core in a tiny URL. See if I can't force this closed. There we go. I'm going to try it this way. Thunderbird. On the network side, I've got several different hosts, and now you can notice there's a blue lightning bolt on each of these, and that blue lightning bolt tells me that I've got a privilege level account. I could also filter through that. So if I just want to see privilege OS agents, I can come here, or I could just go to all agents here, right? And this means that, hey, I just want to look at agents that give me additional post exploitation capabilities. We can run a lot of post exploitation modules directly from the folder called information gathering local. And if I'm hovered on top of an agent, or I'm on top of an agent here, you can see what's highlighted. So I can start running these individually. But we also have the RPT step, local information gathering, which will actually give me the option of running several different local information gathering steps without having to run those individually. So think of the same thing I did in the attack and penetration, where I was running a bunch of exploits. I didn't have to manually pick them one by one. I'm just going to run those all at one time. In this case, I'm going to run local information gathering all at one time. And I could say against all agents, or I could go in and individually select those agents. So hit here. Here's all those categories. So if I wanted to go through and say, well, I'm not really concerned about harvesting credentials or emails or network information, I could just deselect that and it's not going to do it. In this case, I'm just going to throw everything at it. Get that out. And if I open this up, you can see it's running a lot of post-exploitation steps, right? And I can look to see what's happening in the module output to see if there's anything that's going to, now this takes a second to populate. As you can see the module output for client side, I can see if someone sent the email. Now nobody's clicked the link because my Thunderbird was acting up. So nobody's viewed it, clicked it, submitted any form. So if I go back over to client side, you can see that we have something that'll automatically tag a user if they click the link. So let's see if I can get back over here. Get message. There it is. All right, so nobody's clicked the link, so nothing's been tagged. I don't have any good information. I can't see, what type of browser they have or anything like that. So let's go ahead and click the link. Read the email. I click link. See, this is the web server that's hosting that page. Now you can change this. You will need to kind of alter your DNS settings or set up your DNS to resolve, but you can change this. So back over in Core, it will register that I have clicked this link. And then once it does that, it'll be able to fingerprint the browser and information like that. Now over here, what can I do with a privileged agent? So earlier I right click, so maybe I do shell access here, or maybe I browse the files. So I can browse the files this way. I can go to a specific file. I can maybe upload an additional file, or I could download a file. Maybe I want to upload a backdoor, or maybe I want to create another agent and upload that up and connect that to something. I can do shell access like I showed you earlier. If I'm on a Windows machine, I can do PowerShell. I can just easily get the username, screenshot, Mimikatz. And again, I'm running a bunch of post-exploitation steps. All of those are kind of being run from here. And anything that I harvest from a credential standpoint will be listed in my identities folder. And I could use these identities to go back and replay those. So these are all the identities. Maybe I might have some in Windows. It takes a little bit of time to go through that. So then I could also just come over here and pick a specific folder. So let's say I want security account manager. I could come and say password dumps from the SAM account. So I go to the agent. It'll highlight, and then I could just do password dumps from the SAM. And see if I'm able to harvest anything directly from this. So all of these are steps that I could run manually like I showed you, or I could run those from the file itself, just different ways of doing that. So it's getting process lists. All of these things are automatic tools within Core, and it's very helpful for users as they're kind of going through a test or learning how to do penetration testing. Maybe they're on the vulnerability team and they just want to validate vulnerabilities. Maybe they're just starting into this field and they want to have something that gets them the value very quickly. A lot of different use cases for Core Impact and how it can be useful for you. We can also clean up all of these agents. I can go in and right click and just hit uninstall like I did earlier. I could clean those up at a global level. So you can see here's the information's happening over here. which would basically uninstall those. Most of these agents have an expiration date that's going to be tied to them. And so I could come through those and say, hey, I want these agents to expire, one day after my test is finished, so I could put a specific date for those to uninstall themselves. So just different ways you can do that. Privilege escalation, we have a lot of privilege escalation exploits. So, I've got root on a lot of these machines, so I probably don't need them. But if I didn't, maybe I want to run privilege escalation type of exploits against these agents. So these are local exploits. Back over on the client side, you can see that I was able to finally tag that someone clicked the link. Let's check back over here. Get out of that. Try it here. Yes, so now looks like it's LinkedIn, so I could say James at why not James, and we'll say November 3rd. Now remember, I'm going to redirect myself to core security, so it's going to take a second. Usually this doesn't take that long, but here I am, right? So let's think I put in my credentials, I redirect myself to maybe past the login page. So typically what I'll do with LinkedIn is I'll just put in normal LinkedIn, and it'll say, hey, here I'm in LinkedIn. So all I know is I logged in, and now I'm presented with my LinkedIn page. But over on the back end, you can see that someone clicked the link and someone submitted a form. So it's tagged two different users. Now it's the same user in my case, but if I go here and double click, I can look at information around the user, whether they clicked, so I can see the fingerprint of their browser information, and if they submitted any form data. Right? So now, look at that. I've got username and password for whatever they put in. So, I mean, LinkedIn's one thing, right? However, if you want to do something tied to your domain credentials, like Office 365, or maybe an internal application or something that users can use, anything that might give you credentials that you can take back over to the network and right-click and create a new identity and say, hey, I've got their domain credentials for Windows, and then put in that information, password. You can also capture the hash information over there on the network side or the web application, on the client side, sorry. All right, so finally, what can we do from a reporting standpoint? So we have several different modules for reporting, and those are all going to be listed, again, in your reporting folder, as you can get here. But you can also get to those directly from the wizard screen. So if you come to the wizard screen, I can go through and parse out each of these reports, or they're already going to be parsed out, excuse me. So if I just want network summary, executive summary report, it's going to be very high level. If I want host-based activity, which is going to be every single thing that happened over here, so each module, each parameter I set. Maybe I want a vulnerability report, so what was I able to exploit against? Now the reports come out in two formats, so I'll just open up executive summary. And the first one is going to be, you can choose either one. But you can either choose Excel or PDF. Now Excel is going to be one that you can change, so think of it like pivot tables. You can go in and change your logo, you can change information regarding the report, and then save that report later so you don't have to keep changing it each time. The PDF will be your final version, what you hand off to someone. Most of the time people will do it in Excel. What you can also do is you can duplicate a report. So as you can see, I've got an executive summary report, but I duplicated it to say executive 2, because this executive 2, I made changes to the logo, I added some information, took some information out. So now, if I'm doing this test each time, I don't have to go through and keep changing the report each time. I can just go and grab this report and say, this is what I want to use for executive summary 2 based off of the client, or based off the way I like this report to use. And that's at a global level. So what I mean by that is, regardless of what workspace you're in, that's going to be applicable to each of those. We also have some one-step RPTs, and this is helpful if you just want to use some core to go out and do the top 3, meaning you want to do information gathering, attack and penetration, and local information gathering. You can come in here and see the network vulnerability test. It's going to run through the top 3 plus cleanup. So it's going to go out there and do all of these things in one step. Basically, you just give it the range that it's going to put in, or you put in the range you want it to crawl and test against, and it'll go. Remediation validator, that's very helpful. So I've done this test today, and I've exploited several machines, right? These machines down here, I've got exploits, agents, I should say, payloads. And I want to hand that off to my patch team or whoever and say, hey, or, if I'm a consultant, hey, we've exploited these targets, here's the report. And they come back 3 weeks later or a month later and say, hey, we patched all of those, those are no longer vulnerable or exploitable. And I can say, great, as long as I have the workspace open, I can come in with Remediation Validator, and I can set this up, and I can say, run the same exploits I did that landed the first time. So I don't have to recreate the entire thing from scratch. If I have the workspace available, I can go in and just retest only those exploits that I knew that landed against those vulnerabilities. And even if I pivoted or did it from another way, it'll actually do those as well. So a really quick way for you to show value to your vulnerability validation use case, or even to, as your consultant, maybe going and doing retest options for your clients. Vulnerability Scanner Validator. This is a one-step RPT that actually gives you the ability to take all that scan data that you've applied and run exploits against that scan data only. Now you can do this from a specific module over here, but this will say, okay, I've got my Nessus data, I'm going to import it from that file, and then I want to reach out and just apply that data and then attack only that data what's in that. So really a one-to-one relationship with the scanner to see if you can exploit against that. So it saves you, the one-step RPT saves you a lot of time of going through and individually doing all of this. And we have those on each level, right? So web application, client side, and network level. So we have additional videos on our website that you can check out that goes a little bit more in depth. I think I covered most of these in here. But we also have some training videos on how things work individually. So if you want to take step by step as well as screenshots. So this has been the demonstration of Core Impact. Feel free to check out the website for additional information.